On the morning of June 12, 1962, guards discovered something impossible. 3 inmates remained in their bunks, except they weren't there at all. Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin had vanished into the night. The question that would haunt the FBI for 60 years had begun. Alcatraz, the Rock, fortress of the American federal prison system, built on an island fortress where escape meant certain death. 1.25 miles of freezing, treacherous water separated inmates from freedom. The San Francisco Bay was a liquid barrier of hypothermia and legend. The currents moved at 8 knots. The water temperature hovered near 50 degrees. Sharks, authorities claimed, prowled these depths. No man, they said, could survive the crossing. No man had ever escaped the Rock and lived to tell about it. Alcatraz opened in 1934 as the federal government's answer to an epidemic of prison breaks. It was built for the most dangerous men in America. The island held only the worst: murderers, racketeers, bank robbers, and men deemed too violent or cunning for any other facility. Maximum security meant isolation. Inmates spent 16 hours daily locked in their cells. Exercise was rationed. Communication was forbidden. The guards were hand-picked. The walls were reinforced. The rules were absolute. Escape was deemed impossible by every rational measure. Yet between 1934 and 1962, 36 men attempted the impossible. 36 desperate gamblers bet their lives against the odds. Some were shot by guards. Some drowned in the bay. Some simply vanished, their fates unknown. None were confirmed to have succeeded. Escape from Alcatraz was written into the collective consciousness as the ultimate impossibility, a suicide mission, the last resort of doomed men. Frank Morris was different. He was not desperate. He was not impulsive. He was a man with an obsession, intelligence, meticulous planning, and a criminal resume spanning decades. Morris had engineered escapes before. He had studied engineering. He understood architecture, construction, and the psychology of systems designed to contain men. In May 1962, Morris was transferred to Alcatraz. Within weeks, he had identified something no one else had seen: a weakness in the fortress, the ventilation shaft behind his cell, a maintenance tunnel that connected to the outside world. The impossible had become possible for a man with vision and allies. He found his partners, the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, men from North Carolina with their own desperation and their own will to survive the bay. For 13 months, they planned. They stole supplies. They constructed tools from items no one thought dangerous. They prepared for the impossible. On June 11th, 1962, they made their move. In the darkness of the prison night, 3 men challenged the fortress that had never been beaten. They removed the ventilation grates. They crawled through the shafts. They reached the roof. They slipped into the waters of San Francisco Bay. By dawn, the FBI was involved. By noon, the Coast Guard had launched a manhunt across the entire bay. By evening, the legend had begun. The question would echo through 6 decades of investigation, speculation, and uncertainty. Did they survive? Or did the bay claim 3 more names for its roster of the lost? Frank Morris was not born a criminal. He was born an orphan, abandoned by a mother who couldn't keep him, raised by strangers who didn't want him. But somewhere in his childhood, in those cold institutional hallways, a brilliant mind began to crystallize. By age 13, Frank Morris had already escaped from a children's reformatory. By his 20s, he had orchestrated breakouts from 3 different facilities. His IQ measured at 133, genius level. He didn't just break rules, he saw through them like transparent glass. Alcatraz in 1962 held America's most dangerous men. Morris arrived in September, transferred from Angola Penitentiary in Louisiana. But somewhere in that fortress of concrete and steel, something unexpected was about to happen. The collision of 3 destinies. The Anglin brothers, John, Clarence, and Alfred, came from a Georgia farming family with nothing but poverty and river water. But those brothers learned something their privileged counterparts never could: how to swim in freezing currents, how to survive cold that killed ordinary men. Clarence Anglin arrived at Alcatraz in 1961, serving time for armed robbery. A year later, his brother John joined him. The two were inseparable, not through circumstance, but through blood and an almost telepathic understanding of each other's capabilities and intentions. Frank Morris was transferred to Alcatraz in 1962. In the prison's laundry, maintenance shops and cells, he observed everything: the guards' routines, the building's ventilation systems, the patterns of water and current beyond the walls. He saw what others saw as impenetrable. He saw possibility. Morris, the orphan genius, the Anglins, the river-tough brothers. In a prison built to house the impossible, they recognized something unprecedented in each other. Morris possessed the intellect to plan what no one had ever accomplished. The brothers possessed the physical fortitude and loyalty to execute it. They shared something rarer than talent. They trusted each other completely. In Alcatraz, where every man was a potential informant, where survival meant paranoia, these three men made an impossible calculation. Together, they might accomplish what mathematics said was impossible. Morris spent months mapping the prison's infrastructure. He sketched the ventilation shafts from memory. He observed that the utility corridor ran directly beneath the roof. He calculated angles, currents, and tides. He built a timeline in his brilliant, restless mind that only he could fully comprehend. The brothers volunteered for every assignment that took them near the prison's periphery. They studied the water, marked the current's strength, memorized the rhythm of the bay. John Anglin was known as a natural athlete. Clarence had the stamina of a man built for endurance. Together, they were preparation incarnate. By 1962, the three men had moved beyond mere acquaintance. They became a unit, a collaboration of complementary obsessions. Morris possessed the architectural brilliance. The Anglins possessed the physical resilience. All three possessed something officials believed impossible to find in Alcatraz: absolute, unwavering faith in an escape that violated every law of probability. In the basement of Alcatraz, a forgotten inmate would change everything. His name was Alan West, and he would become the architect of the impossible. West arrived at Alcatraz in 1957, another forgotten convict, sentenced to America's most secure prison. But unlike most prisoners, West possessed something rare: a criminal mind that refused to accept defeat. He studied, he observed, he waited for months. He moved through the prison's corridors, noting every detail, every weakness, every forgotten corner. In 1962, West was assigned to work detail in the prison's D block, the most isolated, least monitored section of Alcatraz. This would prove to be the turning point. Here, in the dampness and decay of the island's oldest structure, he discovered something extraordinary: the ventilation grills. They were corroded, weakened. The salt air that had surrounded Alcatraz for decades had done what steel bars could not. It had eaten away at the very foundation of the prison's security. West realized the concrete around these grills was crumbling. The mortar that held the metal was disintegrating. For the first time in his years at Alcatraz, West saw not a wall, but a doorway. He began to calculate. The grill led to a ventilation shaft. The shaft connected to other cells, other inmates. West understood what no one else had seen. The prison's lifeline, its very air system, could become an escape route. In early 1962, West began confiding in select inmates. He spoke carefully, methodically, to men he trusted, men who, like him, had nothing left to lose. The conversation was subtle but revolutionary. What if we could dig our way out? Cell by cell, wall by wall. Frank Lee Morris was one of these men. Clarence Anglin and his brother John were others. All of them were career criminals with exceptional minds. All of them understood the implications of what West was proposing. The decision was made in whispered conversations across weeks. They would dig, they would tunnel through the prison's hidden passages. They would use tools fashioned from prison materials, spoons, steel, whatever they could find. It was meticulous, it was insane, it was inevitable. Alan West became the plan's strategist. He knew the prison's rhythms, when guards changed shifts, when surveillance was lightest, when the sound of tools would be masked by prison noise. The conspiracy was born not from desperation, but from calculation. For months, the four men observed and prepared. They knew they couldn't rush. Prison time moves differently. It stretches, it suffocates, it teaches patience, and patience became their greatest weapon against Alcatraz. This was the moment when Alcatraz's darkness became not a prison, but a canvas for the impossible. The fourth man had emerged. The first spark had ignited, and nothing at Alcatraz would ever be the same. In the darkness of Alcatraz, a revolution was born, not with guns or violence, but with spoons. Every utensil taken from the mess hall became a weapon against captivity, sharpened over months on concrete and stone. But spoons alone could not breach Alcatraz's concrete walls. The men needed something far more ingenious. Frank Morris and John Anglin acquired a vacuum cleaner. From its motor, they engineered an improvised drill. Metal shavings fell like sand through an hourglass of freedom. Every night, as the band played in the recreation area, the real music began. The screech and grind of drilling through steel and concrete. The loud music was their cover. For hours, while guards listened to jazz, these men worked with surgical precision, just cells away. The holes expanded inch by inch. 3 men, Morris, Anglin, and Alan Clayton, working in brutal synchronization, knowing one mistake meant discovery and solitary confinement. But the holes could not remain visible. They painted cardboard grills, carefully matching the original cell fittings, hiding their progress behind an illusion. Night after night, the same ritual: drill, dig, conceal. The risk never diminished. Guards patrolled at unpredictable intervals. They had to become experts in the guards' patterns. Every footstep, every schedule change, one miscalculation meant catastrophe. Months turned into a year. The holes grew deeper, wider. The psychological toll was immense, living in constant fear of discovery. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Behind the cells lay an unused utility corridor, a vertical passage the prison administration had forgotten. This was not just a passage. This was a secret highway, a route that allowed them to move through Alcatraz's skeleton, invisible to every guard. The men realized their drilling had a destination. They were not breaking out of their cells, they were breaking into the infrastructure itself. They could navigate unseen. They could position themselves anywhere in Alcatraz without triggering alarm. The game had fundamentally changed. The patience required was inhuman. Months of labor, knowing discovery meant years added to their sentences. Yet they continued, driven by obsession. Each night brought them closer. But each night also brought danger. A guard stumbling onto the work area, a cellmate growing suspicious. The pressure was immense. The escape plan was dependent on meticulous timing and absolute secrecy. Any information leak meant failure and punishment. They could not trust anyone with their secret. Not family, not other inmates. The fewer people who knew, the safer they were. By June 1962, after 14 months of relentless labor, the escape route was complete. Alcatraz's inmates had achieved the impossible. They had conquered the rock. Beneath the prison guards' watchful eyes, 3 men built the impossible. Not with tools, with ingenuity. Above their cells lay a crawl space, a forgotten void between the roof and the cell block structure. This would become their secret factory. Raincoats. Dozens of stolen raincoats, smuggled piece by piece from the prison laundry. The men began stitching them together with meticulous precision. 58 raincoats transformed into one vessel. Their needlework created seams that would hold their lives in the water. But seams alone would never survive the bay. Steam pipes ran directly through the crawl space. These humble heating systems became welding torches. The men used the intense heat to fuse the seams, creating waterproof bonds. The raft took shape. Roughly 12 feet long, a floating platform engineered from necessity. But buoyancy required more than fabric. They needed flotation devices. Prison life vests, acquired through theft and trade, were stuffed into the coat chambers. 12 vests distributed to maximize buoyancy. Every ounce calculated. Wooden paddles came next, carved from timber scrap, shaped with stolen tools, sanded smooth by patient hands. Simple engineering, effective engineering. But one problem remained. Inflating the raft required air, a pump, a mechanism they didn't possess, until one man realized the solution was already in the prison: a concertina. The musical instrument possessed an accordion-like bellows mechanism. They would dismantle it, repurpose its internal pump system to inflate the raft. The modification required precision: remove the reeds, preserve the bellows, create a one-way valve system using rubber tubing and prison ingenuity. The concertina would become a life pump. By June 1962, their workshop above the guards held everything: the complete raft, paddles, vests, and the converted concertina pump. The engineering was finished. 3 prison guards had no idea what hung above their heads. 3 men had constructed the machinery of freedom through sheer problem solving. All that remained was the bay. The final night approached. Months of theft, stitching, and calculation converged. Everything was ready. Everything was possible. The workshop had delivered. What happens next would prove whether engineering and hope could defeat a concrete island. The water waited. The night was coming. In the darkness of D Block, 3 men crafted the most audacious deception ever attempted behind prison walls. The escape would live or die on a single brilliant idea. Dummy heads placed in bunks during the nightly count. Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin obsessed over every detail. They understood the mathematics of their deception. Guards performed head counts in seconds, moving with routine carelessness through the cell block. The dummy heads required masterwork artistry. Using materials scavenged from the prison, soap, toilet paper, concrete dust, and paint, they sculpted 3 lifelike heads, each roughly the size of a human skull. The critical genius, real human hair, collected meticulously from the prison barbershop floor, strand by strand. The hair was painstakingly applied to make the decoys unmistakably human under the dim, shifting light of evening counts. They called them by nicknames: Oscar, Clay, Knucklehead. Each decoy received eyebrows and facial contours. The paint was mixed carefully to approximate flesh tone under the amber glow of prison lighting, where guards would glimpse them for mere seconds. The psychological gamble was breathtaking. Every night, guards swept through the cell block counting bodies. Every night, these 3 lifelike decoys would fill the bunks of the escapees, buying precious hours before the deception unraveled. They understood the human tendency to see what one expects to see. A guard counting heads at 9:15 p.m., moving mechanically through routine, would spot a rounded shape beneath a blanket and mentally check it off. The decoys didn't need to be perfect. They needed to be plausible. The heads were positioned with theatrical precision. Artists positioned them at angles suggesting sleeping men. Blankets were arranged naturally, as if bodies breathed beneath them. Every element designed to satisfy a cursory glance, and nothing more. The escape was scheduled for the night of June 12, 1962. As darkness fell, the dummy heads awaited their singular purpose: to deceive trained observers for those critical hours when 3 men would vanish into San Francisco Bay. When the evening count began, guards moved methodically. One officer paused at each cell. He saw shapes. He counted. He moved on. The decoys performed their silent role perfectly, as if conjured for this exact moment. The minutes stretched. Hour after hour, the heads remained in position. Midnight passed. 1 a.m. The guards had already moved through their nightly count. No alarm sounded. No emergency whistles pierced the darkness. The deception was holding. The dummy heads were more than objects. They were time machines, ingenious devices designed to purchase the hours when escape might become possible. They represented the mathematical certainty that routine could be weaponized, that human expectation could become a tool. By the time morning came and guards discovered empty bunks, Morris and the Anglin brothers were already beyond reach, their crude but brilliant heads having given them a head start, measured in precious, irreplaceable hours. June 11th, 1962. The night everything changes. 3 men prepare to vanish. Lights out at 9:30. Morris places the decoy heads into his bunk. Papier-mâché and human hair crafted in secret. West's cellmate sleeps. Morris and Anglin slip into the utility corridor undetected, their hearts pounding against concrete walls. The ventilation shaft awaits. Morris climbs first, fingers gripping cold metal, ascending into darkness toward freedom above. But Alan West moves slower. His opening, the hole he spent months enlarging, remains too narrow. His shoulders wedge against metal edges. He pushes harder. The metal cuts his skin. He pulls back, gasping. The hole will not give. West is trapped. Above, Morris and Anglin reach the roof. No turning back. West watches them disappear into the darkness, abandoned on the cell block below. The ventilation shaft opens onto the roof. 50 feet of rainwater pipes descend the exterior wall toward the rocky shore below. Morris tests the first pipe. It holds. He begins the descent, hand over hand, into the freezing night air and absolute darkness. Anglin follows. The pipes creak and groan under their weight. Every sound risks detection. Searchlights sweep the compound above them. Their feet touch the rocky shore. They move low, rapid, invisible. The homemade raft waits, rubber tubes lashed to a wooden frame. They push the raft into the black water. Paddles grip the bay. The current pulls them north, away from the island, away from everything they knew. Back in the cell block, guards discover the decoy heads at dawn. The alarm screams across the island, but Morris and Anglin are already gone. Alan West remains. Still trapped in his cell, he reveals everything to investigators. But Morris and Anglin vanish into the Pacific, their fate unknown forever. The water swallows them. The raft disappears into darkness. 3 men planned the impossible escape. Only one truth remains, the mystery. June 12th, 1962. Dawn breaks over Alcatraz. A routine head count reveals the impossible. 3 men are gone. Warden Paul Madigan stands in the cell block, staring at the empty cells. Within minutes, the most massive manhunt in Federal Bureau of Investigation history mobilizes across San Francisco Bay. The Coast Guard launches 46 vessels. Military helicopters sweep the water. Patrol boats crisscross every current and inlet, searching for bodies or signs of life. The search radius expands with each passing hour. FBI agents flood the docks. The Navy coordinates with local police. Every helicopter, every boat, every diving team is mobilized. This is not a routine escape investigation anymore. This is a desperate race against the Pacific. By noon, the first physical evidence surfaces. A paddle, waterlogged and splintered, emerges from the currents. Then another. Marine experts examine each piece with meticulous precision, photographing, measuring, analyzing. Over the following days, more debris emerges from the bay's relentless currents. Fragments of a rubber life vest, badly deteriorated. The raft itself is never found, but in a waterproof bag, investigators discover something extraordinary. Inside the waterproof bag, identification documents, personal letters, photographs, the Anglin's belongings, recovered from the very waters where, the government would claim, they drowned. But the bag raises critical questions. If the men had drowned, their bodies should have surfaced. The bay's currents are brutal, yes, but predictable. Bodies don't simply vanish, yet no remains were ever discovered. No skeletal evidence, no clothing matching their descriptions. The FBI's official conclusion arrives in 1979, 17 years after the escape. Bureau analysts examined every piece of evidence, interviewed dozens of witnesses, reviewed thousands of documents. Their verdict: the men drowned. The official narrative is logical, reasonable. The Pacific is unforgiving. The raft was makeshift and fragile. The currents are lethal. Escape from Alcatraz, the Bureau concluded, had ultimately only delayed an inevitable death. Yet the evidence itself tells a different story. A story fragmented, incomplete, and deliberately ambiguous. Why did the waterproof bag surface when their bodies never did? Why were no remains ever found in the bay? The official silence on these questions has lasted decades. The FBI closed the case. Officially, John and Clarence Anglin and Frank Stiles disappeared into the Pacific, drowned, case closed. But the absence of evidence became its own testimony. In 1962, 3 men vanished into San Francisco Bay. For 6 decades, one question haunted America: did they drown or did they escape? The official narrative declared them dead. But the evidence suggests something far more intriguing. Survival itself might have been possible. In 2003, Dutch scientists conducted a groundbreaking study. Using computer models and tidal data, they simulated the exact conditions of June 1962. Their conclusion: astonishing. If the men had launched their raft at precisely the right tidal window, between 11:30 p.m. and midnight, the currents would have carried them northwest. Angel Island lay within reach, not to Mexico, not to certain death, to a real destination, a place they could have touched ground, dried off, and vanished into America itself. But a scientific model is just theory. What made this mystery truly fascinating were the fragments, alleged evidence that defied logical explanation. Family claims, photographs, cryptic messages. The Anglin family insisted their brothers survived. They claimed to have received Christmas cards in the years after the escape, signed with cryptic messages, no postmarks, no return addresses. Then came the photograph. In 1975, a picture surfaced, allegedly showing 2 men in Brazil. The family swore one was John Anglin. Could they identify him? The image was grainy, the distance was vast, but the most electrifying claim came decades later. A deathbed confession. Robert Anglin, John's brother, allegedly received a final phone call from John himself just before John died. Robert never disclosed details publicly. The conversation remained family secret, but the implication shook investigators. John Anglin had lived, for years, perhaps decades, outside the law. Then, in 2013, the FBI received a letter, unsigned but claiming to be from John Anglin himself, now elderly and dying. He offered a deal: surrender in exchange for 1 year of medical care. The letter contained details only an escapee would know. Specific facts about the raft, the route, the survival. The FBI examined it exhaustively. Their conclusion: they could neither confirm nor deny its authenticity. Neither confirm nor deny. Not quite dismissal, not quite validation. The ambiguity itself became part of the mystery. Why wouldn't federal authorities definitively prove the letter was false? The competing evidence creates an unsettling oscillation. The science says survival was possible. The family claims say it happened. The FBI's silence suggests something. Skeptics point out the obvious. No confirmed sightings, no fingerprints, no authenticated documents. No bodies, yes, but absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Believers counter with logic equally compelling. What if they succeeded precisely because they vanished completely? What if the silence itself proves the success? For 50 years after 1962, the debate raged. Then new evidence emerged, not from law enforcement, but from amateur investigators online, pooling knowledge across continents. In 2018, investigators discovered Brazilian documentation suggesting 3 men, matching their descriptions, received IDs in the 1960s. The timing aligned, the region aligned, but verification remained impossible. The currents that carried them away in 1962 also carried this case into deeper waters. Every answer generated new questions, every clue contradicted another. What makes the Anglin escape unforgettable is not the solved mystery, it remains unsolved. It is the refusal of closure itself, the possibility that 3 ordinary men accomplished the impossible. In 2017, the FBI officially closed active investigation. They declassified some files, but the core question persists in the public imagination, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. Did they drown in dark water, or did they live? The currents know, the bay keeps its secrets, and somewhere, perhaps, 3 men remain free. 58 years have passed. The fog still rolls over San Francisco Bay, and somewhere in America, 3 men might still be alive, or they became ghosts the moment they touched the water. In June 1962, Morris and John Anglin, along with Frank Morris, executed an escape so meticulously planned that it defied the supposedly impregnable fortress of the Rock. They disappeared into darkness and rain, but the escape itself was only the beginning. What followed was a mystery that would outlast the men who orchestrated it, transforming them from fugitives into American folklore. The Federal Bureau of Investigation launched an immediate manhunt. They combed the bay, dragged the waters, interviewed thousands, yet no bodies emerged. No definitive evidence of death surfaced. The investigation simply went cold. The U.S. Marshal Service, however, refused to close the file. Decades passed. The men aged on, wanted posters that few still remembered. But the case remained active, one of only a handful of federal fugitive investigations kept alive by institutional determination. Popular culture embraced what law enforcement could not solve. In 1979, Clint Eastwood's Escape from Alcatraz transformed 3 desperate men into mythic heroes. The film became canon. Audiences debated the ending passionately. Did the escape succeed? The filmmakers suggested yes. Internet forums erupted with theories. Amateur investigators spent decades analyzing currents, ocean temperatures, and survival calculations. Some believed the men reached South America. In 2013, the FBI received an anonymous letter claiming to come from John Anglin, stating he was alive and living in Brazil. The agency investigated. The letter was inconclusive, it proved nothing, and it changed nothing. The Rock itself became a tourist attraction. Visitors walk the same cell block where Morris planned the impossible. They see the crude dummy left in his cell. They stand where genius met audacity, and nobody knows what happened next. Documentaries multiplied. True crime podcasts dissected every detail. Each investigation reached the same wall. The moment the raft touched water, all certainty vanished. The men became Schrodinger's fugitives, alive and dead simultaneously in public imagination. The bay kept its secret. Over 50 years, it offered no corpses, no artifacts, no final answer. In American true crime, this silence became the most eloquent testimony of all, the power of genuine, enduring mystery. The case file remains open. The wanted posters technically remain active. Morris would be 93 now. The Anglin brothers would be in their 90s. Dead or alive, they transcended their crime and became immortal. The final question remains unanswered. Did 3 men conquer the impossible? Did they row through darkness and reach freedom? Or did the bay claim them, transforming escape into tragedy? 58 years later, we still cannot decide. Perhaps that ambiguity is precisely what makes them legends. The Rock could not hold them, but the mystery they left behind became a prison of its own, one that America will never escape.